Well, hello, friends. I am Reverend Dr. Kendrick Curry, and we're excited to have another time of kidney talks with what George Washington University Ron and Joy Paul Kidney Center and the Minority Organ Tissue Transplant and Education Program. And I'm at the Pennsylvania Avenue Baptist Church. We're all here in Washington, D.C., and I have some amazing and outstanding co hosts and Dr. Clyde Callender, the senior statesman of us all, and Dr. Joseph Keith Melanson, who is a esteemed transplant surgeon at the Ron and Joy Paul Kidney Center and the George Washington University Hospital. And so we just welcome you today. We're going to have an exciting presentation by Dr. Melanson on the importance of living donor transplantation. So get ready with your questions. We're excited. We're excited. Say hello, Dr. Melanson, Dr. Callender.
Hello, everyone. Hello out there in TV land.
Hello, everyone. Hello.
All right, it's on you, Dr. Melanson.
Okay, thank you, Reverend Curry. As always, I am so happy to be here with you guys this afternoon. And this is a very, very important topic. And I thought about why we needed to kind of rehash this, so to speak, is because, you know, obviously I meet with people to discuss transplantation every day. It's my job to do transplants. However, it's very, very important. I know Dr. Callender understands this, to reiterate the fact that we have a gap. There's this huge gap in the country right now from how many people should be donating and how many people are actually donating, particularly live donor, particularly minorities, and most particularly African Americans. And the first point to be made is that we, people of color, African Americans in particular, we have the greatest need for kidney transplants or for renal replacement therapy. And the reason is that we have the most need of actual renal replacement therapy. In other words, we make up 13% of the population, and we make up more than a third of the people that actually need transplants. Now, why is that? People always want to know, well, why is that? Well, it's a lot of different reasons, but mostly we have more of the precursor diseases that lead to kidney failure, right? I see this in my own family. Almost every week I'm talking to someone from Louisiana or Texas about kidney disease. And invariably, it starts with diabetes, high blood pressure, and obesity. Those are the three deadly problems in America, but definitely in African America. And what we are dealing with is an epidemic. We have an epidemic of kidney disease because we have an epidemic of high blood pressure, diabetes, and obesity. And in many patients, they're all tied together, right? You have patients who are obese with high blood pressure and diabetes, right? And I'm just going to say this. I say this on the show so much. You have high blood pressure until you do not have high blood pressure, right? So people think I had this discussion with a family member just this morning, and I was explaining to her that she still has high blood pressure. And she's almost arguing with me that she's on this medicine and she saw a doctor and her doctor didn't tell her anything. And I'm like, look, you have high blood pressure, although it's better. Her numbers are like 130s over 90s, which is an improvement, but it's still high blood pressure. I had a student here. I asked her what's a normal blood pressure. She told me 120 over 80. And I said, it's actually below 120, below 80, right? So a normal should be like 115 over 75. That's a normal blood pressure, right? And anything over that is high, right? And I think the message, the reason why people get mixed messages is because we as treating physicians, particularly when we start off with a patient that comes in at a blood pressure of 200 over 100, we are very when they get down to 130 over 85. That is impressive. They've come down a long way when they're 130, 135 over 85. And although they've come a long way, they're still not normal. There's still a way to go. So why talk about live donor transplantations? Because we have the greatest need. Now, what Dr. Callender spent his whole career doing and did a phenomenal job was awakening the community to the idea of transplantation and deceased donor transplantation and why that's of the utmost importance. And we, the African American community, we've done a great job of donating after death. For matter of fact, we actually donate beyond our population number. We are very much quite altruistic, right? So we will donate the organs of our family in order to meet the needs of the community, which is beautiful, right? But it just goes to show that there is some incongruency when you start talking about deceased donation and live donation, because although we lead the way in donating after death, we trail everybody in donating while we are still alive. And I realize that there are a lot of cultural things that come into play with donation, but I really believe we can't get caught up in that concept that certain cultures just don't donate. You know, I had an African patient in my clinic earlier today, and I always kind of jokingly, I said, Africans never donate. Right. And that's not really true. It's almost like a Bushian sort of thing, because Africa, after all, is a continent. It's not a country. And there's a lot of diversity between different countries. And I can tell you that people from Ghana are much more likely to donate than people from, say, Nigeria, or people from the southern part of Africa versus, say, people from Ethiopia. But these are just generalities. And what is more important than getting caught up in these cultural norms is understanding, or rather, not even understanding, is actually imparting wisdom to a patient that needs better health literacy. Because people donate when they understand better. And that's part of what my mission. And I would say this is also Dr. Callender's mission and my team, is to try to do a better job. Just like Dr. Callender. Let me tell you, when he was doing MOTEP in the 1980s and 90s and early 2000s, people were saying the same thing. They were like, they don't donate because it's a cultural thing, right? They don't do it because it's a cultural thing. But he had to change the culture. Right now, I put this photo of myself. Reverend Curry probably thinks I just wanted to show myself looking good, but there's a point. There's a point to the picture, and the point is, I do all transplant. Right, I do deceased donor, living. I do it all. But what is of the utmost importance is getting across why, in particular, is live donor transplant so important. And go to the next slide, because I think it's the kind of the take home message. Time is of the essence, right? And I go to these transplant meetings all the time, and we have these debates. Dr. Callender knows this. We have these debates over what type of kidney is the best kidney, and do you pump or do you not pump, and all this kind of stuff. But the most important thing is the timing. In other words, if you tell me if you ask me what is the best type of kidney to receive, I will say, well, tell me about the recipient. And the reason I'll ask that is, how much time does the recipient have? And what I mean by that is, kidney disease accelerates death. Kidney disease accelerates illness, right? So if I needed a transplant, I want the transplant that I'm going to get the fastest, right? So time is of the essence. Here's one of the things I like to tell people when I'm trying to educate them about transplant. Most of the people that are currently on the transplant list will never be transplanted. Let me say that again. There are approximately 100,000 people on the transplant list. And although last year we did the most transplants we've ever done in a year, we still are not keeping up with the demand. So if you're waiting on a deceased donor organ, chances are you will never be transplanted, either because you will die before you get transplanted, or your health will deteriorate to such a point that you are no longer a candidate. So it is of the utmost importance that you get transplanted as quickly as possible. And usually, not all the time, but usually, if you have a live donor, you can be transplanted much, much more quickly than if you are waiting on a deceased donor. One of the problems in trying to get people to understand, people that tend to push back on the idea of one of their family members donating, is for them to understand that just because they can get on the list doesn't mean that they're going to get a deceased donor transplant. One of the common arguments I might have with a patient, a recipient patient, is that they do not want to put any family member out of the way by having to risk anything by going through an operation to save their life. And they would rather wait. This is particularly true for parents. Parents, and they have children, and they will tell me, I don't want to, I'm supposed to give to my kids, not have my kids give to me. And one of the things I want them to understand is nothing is better for your kids than for you to have a long life. And your life will most probably be quite shortened if you do not receive a transplant. And it's very, very safe for your kids to donate. But one of the reasons why we have this argument is in the back of their mind, they're thinking, I'm going to be okay. I just need to sit and wait a little bit longer, and then I'll get a deceased donor. It may not be as good, but I'd rather do that than taxing someone in my family. And albeit that's a very noble way of thinking of things, it's not accurate, because what that person does not understand is that they probably will not survive, or at least be in as good a health as they need to be to get a transplant. So that's one of the first things I want my patients to understand, is that time is of the essence. Next slide. All right, so what do we need? We need people to be as healthy as possible on both sides, okay? So typically on the recipient side, you are at your healthiest point before you start dialysis or after you are on dialysis for a short period of time. Your health will slowly, or maybe even in an accelerated fashion, go the wrong direction. So what we want is the healthiest possible patient on the recipient side. In order to really have a chance at a live donor transplant, you need to have not just someone who's willing to be a donor, but they need to qualify to be a donor. One of the sad things that we see in our community is that sometimes people do come forward to donate, but they're not in good enough health to donate, right? So the collective community needs to be moving their health in the right direction, right? And again, we've talked about it on this program, Reverend Curry, so many times. What is a healthy diet? What is a healthy lifestyle? And I am encouraged. I go to the gym most mornings, and I've been encouraged by the fact that this year I've seen more people staying with the gym, because normally what happens is everybody starts in January, and by February they're all gone. But we're already basically in March, and I've seen the numbers are much better than they've ever been. People are sticking with the gym, so that's good. That's what we need. We need a healthier community, because if you need a transplant, you need someone in your circle who's going to be healthy enough to donate. That means not being obese, and definitely not having high blood pressure themselves, or at least high blood pressure that's not under control, or diabetes. So we need healthy people on both sides if they are going to qualify to be your donor. The statistic I love to quote is only about 25% of people that come forward to be donors will qualify to be donors, right? So that means if you need a donor, you need like 4 people to step up if you're going to find one healthy. Now that's just a general kind of rule because it depends on the health of your community. The healthier your friends and family are, it makes it more likely that somebody will pass muster and be able to be a donor. So we have to have healthy people to come forward to be donors. Next slide. All right. Now this is an interesting book that I was actually introduced to by a few of my donors. I don't think this is anything I would have come into contact with had I not had these young people introduce me to this author. His name is Peter Singer, and I had 3, count them, 3 donors, all of them what we call non-directed donors, all of them younger than the age of 30, came forward and they named this person, Peter Singer, as the reason why they were donating. Okay. Now, Reverend Curry, you're going to get a kick out of this because this guy is not really religious. If anything, he thinks of himself as being an atheist, but he is Jewish by birth, and he was a professor for many years at Princeton, and he is probably one of the most popular philosophers in the country today, and he has had I believe, a very positive influence on that young, selfish generation, right? I mean, think about it. We all talk about how these young people are different, and by different we mean that they are really into themselves, right? And this professor has, in his lectures and now books and podcasts, has convinced young people that they need to, in order to be happy, they need to be altruistic. And he makes that connection. And I think he makes it in exactly the way that Jesus Christ makes it, even though he wouldn't say that, but in very much the same sort of argument. He talks about being the paradox of hedonism. In other words, to be hedonistic means to do things to make yourself happy. Right. And if you run after that, if you run after a hedonistic lifestyle, I feel like I should be given a sermon in Reverend Curry's church. But, you run after a hedonistic lifestyle and
pray for him.
and you oftentimes find yourself unhappy. Right. And he says the paradox is if you do the opposite, right, if you do something that is not for your pleasure, or at least primarily for your pleasure, but for the pleasure or the benefit of someone else, that actually brings you more pleasure. Like I said, this is definitely a Christian type message. Anyway, this gentleman's book has so positively influenced these young people that they have come forward in unprecedented numbers to be non-directed donors. This is not even giving to a brother or a sister, just coming forward and saying, the most good I could do is to try to save someone else's life. And I think it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I think it stitches quite well into the message that the 3 of us come from, which is, the Judeo-Christian message. But the idea is to get people to understand that they are happier when they donate. Let me tell you something. I've been doing this for now over 20 years, and I can tell you with almost 100% clarity that every person that I've had donate a kidney is happier on the other side. And that is 100% fact. So there is definitely something to what Singer is saying to these young people, that if you do something that helps others, it comes back to you multifold. Next slide. So again, what have we found in our program? Dr. Callender knows that if you look nationwide, we, for the last few years, have been the most successful with getting minority patients to donate to other minority recipients. And that outflanks what is going on or outstrips what is going on nationwide. Because if you look at the percentage of African Americans who are live donors, it hovers around 11%. So we are not donating at our population. And remember, I already told you that our actual percentage of kidney disease is closer to 35%. So we are not nowhere near where we need to be in live donation rates. So how do we fix this? We fix it the exact way that Dr. Callender fixed it when you're talking about deceased donation. You've got to educate the population. So that starts with health literacy. And I think in our little echo chambers, we oftentimes don't understand what patients don't understand, right? We believe that, since it seems that all this data is out there and this knowledge is out there, that people know it, but they actually don't. And we need to do a better job of educating people, right? And so health literacy is not just the knowledge going from the healthcare provider to the person that needs healthcare. It goes all different directions, meaning there are lots of providers who need better education, right? Because we send messages, even that we don't intend, right? When we don't weigh our patients, when we don't have discussions about their weight, when we don't have discussions about lifestyle, when we don't have discussions about intake of sodium or salt, or even call it salt. I've had people tell me the doctor was talking about sodium. I didn't understand what he was talking about. Right. And so you gotta make sure, one of the things I try to do with my patients is I try to have them tell me back what I told them, because just because you're saying something doesn't mean they hear you. Or just because you think you're saying something in a certain way that's very understandable doesn't mean the patient understands. So what we need to do a better job of is having that conversation in that sort of way. And guess what it takes? It takes time. And part of the reason why I believe there's so much more miscommunication and why health illiteracy is increasing is because we are under such pressure by the payers of healthcare bills to hurry through these appointments that we're not having time to have substantive conversations. And it's in these longer conversations. My team makes fun of me pretty much every day for all kinds of reasons. But one of the reasons they make fun of me is because of the long conversations I have with patients. And what I find is that by having these longer conversations, we have more substantive conversations. I find out so much more about the patients and what's going on in their lives and their health literacy than the nurses or other members of my team. And so you need to have these conversations with the patients, and you've got to impart this data to them. I have been so happy to see people that have been obese for years change their lifestyles and all of a sudden start losing weight. People that think that every meal needs extra salt and all of a sudden get rid of the salt shaker, right? Because look, you guys know I love flavor. I've been using, my favorite thing now is turmeric. I put turmeric on everything. And but the point is you can use a lot of different types of seasoning. My food is very pepper. I like very hot. I use a lot of pepper, but I don't. For the most part, I try not to use salt, and that's obviously I had to get to that point. But the point is, you can change your taste, you can alter them. You don't have to do what you've always done. And I think people get caught up in this little crutch of saying it's my culture. No. You can change that. You can change that. You can make alterations. Things can still be culturally appropriate and just, healthier. So health literacy, I think, is very important. And I think it's important for us to listen. This is what I always tell my new doctors and APPs in my clinic. You've got to listen to the patients. The patients will tell you what's wrong with them, but you got to listen. If you are doing all the talking, that's not the conversation. So health literacy is very important. Next slide. All right, so now I should quiz Reverend Curry. Neoplatonism is such a big part of the history of Christianity, and it's kind of like what we were talking about with this modern philosopher. You know, I don't think Plato would have thought of himself as a Christian. Well, first of all, he predated Christ by hundreds of years, but Neoplatonism became such an important part of what became our religious foundation. You know, one of my favorite people in history, Saint Augustine, was a classic Neoplatonist, right? Plato talked about the primacy of a supreme being. In the Judeo-Christian way of looking at the world, we know who that supreme being is. But Plato talked about it, and it's kind of funny because although he would have thought of himself as maybe not being an atheist, but definitely not being religious in the Greek sense, he thought of himself as believing in a supreme being. We know who that supreme being is, but the point is that when you stitch together this guy Singer that I was talking about earlier with Neoplatonism and then the Judeo-Christian traditions, we all come to the same place. That's what's so ironic. And that place is that some supreme being made us to be the best that we could be, right? And as we are trying to be the best that we can be on the recipient side, the donor side, all humanity side, we need to move in a direction to being better. And I'm a physician, and you are better when you are healthier, right? And the healthier you are, the more likely you are to be able to benefit your fellow man, right? And I think the best example of that is being a donor, particularly a live donor. And so Neoplatonism, I think, is a big part of that. Next slide. So in conclusion, one of my favorite movies of all time is Color Purple. And at the end of that movie, you have those two sisters coming together in the field of the purple flowers, where the whole theme of the movie comes from those purple flowers, and it is a metaphor for their happy place, right? And I believe that we are in our happy place when we do for others. Our community is a very, very altruistic community. We have done this better than, I believe, almost any community on this planet because we have had to depend on each other to such a degree. Dr. Callender is probably the only one old enough to remember this, but even the gun-toting Black Panthers, that we tend to have this image of them being these big, bad, gun-carrying people. But actually, it was about feeding children. It was about doing good for the community, right? It was as altruistic could get, right? They used to walk around with law books, so they wanted to interpret the law so that the police officers would not abuse their privileges in the community. My point is that in every walk, not just through the church or through organizations that we traditionally think of as being bastions of this altruism, but even in the Divine Nine and the Black Panthers and even the Nation of Islam, so on and so forth, we have done this better than almost any community. And therefore, in the spirit of MOTEP, this is what we need to be doing in regards to living donation, because we have it in our DNA. Next slide. Questions. Now, I have here Miles Davis, Kind of Blue, which is the greatest jazz album ever. For those of you that are aficionados, this is my favorite jazz album. I love Miles Davis. He was something else. And that album, I believe, Coltrane and Cannonball Adderley. I mean, it was just an absolute juggernaut. So anyway, I want to open it up to questions, Reverend Curry.
Yeah, thank you so very much. This is a great presentation around the importance of living transplantation. Something we don't hear about. I often hear about people competing to get on a list, and some make it and some don't, right?
Right.
And then some get false hopes. I do want to ask. There's a question that I'll just start off with about, are people who donate a kidney at higher risk for health issues down the road?
It's a great question, and it's a question I often get, and and I know Dr. Calendar understands this very well. That the short answer is no. Now, of course, that's in general. But we've been doing live donation in this in this population for a very long time. The very first successful kidney transplant came from a live donor, all the way back in 1954. So we have lots and lots of data, including data in all the ethnic groups in this country. So we know that it's exceedingly safe to be a live donor, and it's only gotten safer over time. So we are doing a better job now than we even used to do. And the reason is because we've become really astute at picking up the things that could be a problem later in life for people regarding their kidney disease. And now we even have genetic tests. So we can look in people's genes to see if they are at risk of any sort of kidney maladies as they get older. So right now, the typical person that donates a kidney has less of a risk of having kidney problems than someone, just a general person in the population. That's number one. And then number two, some of my old friends from Hopkins, Dori Segev and his group did a phenomenal study where they went in and they matched people that donated their kidneys with someone out in the country that was almost like an identical twin to them. Same age, same health, same height, same weight, all that kind of stuff. And what they found was that, because what they wanted to recreate was, if your identical twin gave a kidney and you didn't, what is your kidney function going to be like in 20 years, 30 years? And what they found was, indeed, the person that donated, their kidney function is not as good as the identical twin that did not donate. However, if they went all the way through expected life expectancy, they never developed kidney failure, right? Now, the caveat here is African Americans have more kidney disease. And there have been papers written in our community that says African American kidney donors have a higher risk of kidney disease than white kidney donors. And all true, it is exactly in keeping to our rate of kidney disease. In other words, if you were likely to have kidney disease, then if you donate, you're still likely to have kidney disease. And that's in the same proportion to our makeup here in the population. So, like I said, the short answer is, being a donor, except in the rarest of cases, unless there's a complication or something, you are not at higher risk than the general public to have kidney disease.
Wow. That's amazing. You know, um, say a word or two about the fear that some folk have with regard to the donation process.
Right.
How do you calm the spirit so that folk will be willing to just even consider giving?
Yes. And again, great question, Reverend Curry. So, we as African Americans, we tend to be a little bit suspicious of everything in this country, right? Given our history, particularly the healthcare industry, because, to be honest, we have been preyed upon in so many ways. So it is true that racism, prejudice still exists in all aspects of life here in America. So I think that some of the reluctance in the Black community is that, how can you really trust? I mean, this is a big leap in trust to say, all right, I'm coming forward. I want you to be able to open me up, pull out one of my organs, and give it to someone else. That's a big leap of faith.
It
And
is indeed.
isn't it? Yeah, I mean that's a lot to ask for. So what I tell people is basically what I've said here today, which is number one, you will never in your life go through a more extensive process to healthcare to look at your health than when you are evaluated to be a kidney donor. Number one. Number two, and I'm not just saying this because with my program, I'm saying this nationwide. The entire community of transplant in this country, I believe, are actually too cautious. Let me say that again. Too cautious when dealing with African American donors, right? Because I think that knowing that there's more kidney disease in the African American community makes all of these hospitals across the country treat the African American donor with kid gloves. And if anything is abnormal, they push them away. So
Right.
I believe we have the opposite problem, not our normal problem of people not thinking about our health enough, which is the normal problem in healthcare. We have the problem of people being too cautious in dealing with us and not letting us save the lives of our own people. Because look, if you look at the death rate or the chance of death with kidney disease, our community is most affected, right? Which means you got the greatest number of people that are going down that tunnel of dying early or death because of kidney disease. Yet the community is being all ultra conservative in who they let come in to save their lives. One of the reasons why my program I think is more successful is that we treat the African American donor pretty much like we treat any donor, right? Because we understand that this is not a static process, right?
Right.
This is a dynamic process. So if you come into my office and you have high blood pressure, you're overweight, you're pre-diabetic, you know what we do? We counsel you and we tell you, you know what? This is what you need to do to lose weight. This is what you need to do to not have high blood pressure and not be pre-diabetic. And then come back and we will work with you. And given that dynamic kind of process, we wind up getting people to the point where they can donate. And not only do they donate, but later in life, because I see these people years after they donate, they're in much better health as a result of not only donating, but going through the process and becoming much better literate about their health.
Right. So I appreciate that so much, because this sounds like really an education piece. It's a health literacy
Yeah.
program, and we need to talk more about that and in the future, I think, because that's where we have to go. Healthy people help make a healthy society, and we need to have more health literacy. I do want to give some time to Dr. Clive Callender, who may have a few questions with regard to living transplantation. And then I encourage those who are joining us to really put your questions in the chat. We have time to hear from experts that are actually doing the surgery, that doing the procedures that of living transplantation, and you want to hear from them. Dr. Callender?
Yeah, I think that it's so important to recognize that one of the most important things we did in our campaign was get our patients and our communities to love themselves and take care of themselves. Because as St. Francis of Assisi said before Peter Singer, it isn't giving that you receive. It's in pardoning that you're pardoned. It's in dying that you're born to eternal life. And the point that Dr. Melanson emphasizes that so many studies have been done about donors, and and how their altruism has resulted in them feeling so good about themselves, recognizing, yes, that they are heroes, and that what they've done is not only good for who they gave their organ to, but it is extremely good for them. And so I think this whole concept of understanding that in giving you receive uh, is something that we need to have more of. And I think Dr. Melanson is to be commended to putting things into perspective, understanding that altruism is one of the greatest things that you can do for yourself. And it is in giving that you can make things better for all. I think one of the greatest things that I've experienced is to see over the decades. I've been in transplant for 5 decades now, and to see how people are 10, 20 years after transplantation, and how their families are. Whether they have lived or died or done well or not, they are always grateful for the fact that they've had the opportunity to learn and become people who will give to others, recognizing that it isn't giving that they will receive themselves.
You know, Reverend Curry, if you just give me a
Yes.
second, I was going to ask Dr. Callen a question because, you know, I talked about how successful your program was, but I wonder if you could go back to the beginning. What made you so optimistic that you would be successful? What made you know when you started with MOTEP and trying to educate the community that you felt like you were going to be able to make such a difference?
In all honesty, I never thought I would be successful. And when I started out, they said blacks will not give, blacks do not give. Uh, and I thought to myself, why should I be successful? But then I realized that my whole life had been in church, and that this was something that I should do whether I was going to be successful or not. But it wasn't because I thought I was going to be successful. It was because I realized that I had to do it. And so I
Hmm.
therefore did it. And then, in all honesty, to my surprise, the miracle actually came to pass. As you know, when we looked together at the data that indicated that the miracle had happened, that the group that they said would not donate became the group that gave more donations, deceased donations, than any other ethnic group.
Well, I think this is very powerful, and those listeners, those of faith, and perhaps those that are not, have heard of the importance of this human good, particularly that you spoke of with Peter Singer and this higher noble ideal, Dr. Melanson, that was spoken of in terms of the good that you can do by kidney transplantation. I would ask that you go back, basically, how does somebody that's on the side where kidneys are failing, are starting to fail, what do they need to do in terms of getting a nephrologist, or when do they come see you? How do we start to get that process going? And even if you can comment on, you know, what do we need to do with regard to kidney health so that we don't have to go to transplantation?
Yeah, no, thank you, Reverend Curry, because honestly, that's the calls that I get, which and I'm happy to answer them. And you're so right. This is where the big gap is, right? You've heard me on this program talk about the 5 stages of kidney disease,
Right.
how the first 3 stages can be reversible. But you got first of all, you got to get diagnosed, right? So oftentimes when I'm getting these calls, people, my family or friends are calling and they're saying, "Hey, I went to the doctor and they mentioned something about my creatinine, and what's going on with that?" And so I have to get their records and I look at everything, and here's what I tell them, which is it's the same message. I said, all right, you have injured your kidneys. Over time, you've injured your kidneys, and they are injured because of the problems that we talk about all the time. Obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, right? The insults like non-steroidals, ibuprofen. I have a friend who literally pops these things like it's candy, right? So what I have to do is I have to kind of, pull them from the ledge. I'm like, look, wait a minute now. What you're doing is bad, but you can fix it, right? And here is how you start fixing it. And this is where you find the gap, right? That for whatever reason, oftentimes the healthcare providers are not breaking it down to in simple a way, in simple enough terms that people understand what I'm about to say, which is you can fix this by changing your lifestyle, right?
Right.
It's what Dr. Calendar talks about all the time, right? You gotta start taking care of yourself, right? So one of the things and actually I kind of laugh when I think about it because it's something that I've heard Calendar talk about, but just prayer and meditation. In other words, we live in this hurry up world, right? And people are eating all this fast food and comfort food, and they're running home, and they're just always in a hurry. Well, that's not the best. That's not the way to be healthy, right? That's a way to gain weight. That's the way to eat unhealthy, right? So one of the first things I tell people is cook at home. Just, but it's not about because they will ask me what do I get when I go to the fast food restaurant, and I say don't go to the fast food restaurant. Just don't go at all because there's really nothing healthy there, right? Even what you think is healthy is not healthy when you get it in a restaurant because they're adding all kind of junk to it. You only know how healthy stuff is if you cook it. So one of the things you do, I tell them is find a way to cook at home, even if you have to meal prepare, and you cook on Sunday and then make a bunch of packages for the week. That's much healthier than eating out. Number one. Number two, become more active. Again, you don't have to join a gym and lift weights and all that. Just walk, right? I had this conversation with one of my uncles. I was like, just figure out how to walk for an hour, 5 days a week, right? And then sometimes now I'm not saying you have to do this, but if you need to make a sudden change for a period of time, becoming a vegan or vegetarian is a good thing to do. I'm not saying it has to be the rest of your life, but it will shock your system. Particularly some people need a system shock, right? Because they're really heading in the wrong direction. So what you want to do is you want to do things that get your body going in a different direction, and then you can ease meat and fish back into your diet in a healthier way. But my point is the number one thing people really need to do is lifestyle change, and that is food, that is exercise. But I have increasingly learned from the likes of you and and Dr. Calendar that putting some time to be at peace, to pray, to meditate, to listen to Kind of Blue, which is one of the things I do that relaxes me is to just sit in the dark room and listen to Miles Davis. So whatever you do that calms you down is going to help bring down your blood pressure and make you healthier. So these are the sorts of things I tell people. And then I tell them from a health point of view, always get your results and look at them because they're trends, right? So wherever you are, you may be in a bad place, but you need to start trending the other way. And you need to start looking at your labs all the time. You should have a copy of everything. These days, the patients can get their results, right? It's not an excuse to say, well, the doctor didn't tell me this or I didn't know. No. You should be looking at them. You should be asking questions. You should ask if the doctor hasn't gotten your urine and looked for protein in your urine, you should be asking for that because it's just not an excuse. You need to educate yourself about your health.
Well, I think that's wonderful. Go ahead, Dr. Calendar.
Yeah, one of the things that I appreciated is that every person of color who's over 45 years of age should get their urine checked for protein.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that is not being done because perhaps maybe when you go get your annual physical, they don't pay for it. But you should ask your doctor to check your urine protein. And if you have any protein in your urine, then this means this goes right along with what Dr. Curry was talking about. Then they can find out if you've got protein in your urine, how you can reduce that protein in your urine so that you can have being the first three stages of kidney disease that Dr. Melanson was talking about. And if you find that you have protein, that means this is the earliest sign of kidney disease. And that's the time that you start doing those things that Dr. Melanson talked about. Uh, uh, Fruits and vegetables, drinking plenty of water, exercising, as he mentioned, whether it's walking or whatever it is you want to do. But that's the time to change your lifestyle. And if you're over 45 and you get your annual physical, please insist that your doctor check your urine and find out if you have protein in your urine.
That's a very
Follow that.
helpful and practical thing. Thank you, Dr. Callan. That's helpful and practical. I do want to follow up with two questions. One to you, Dr. Callan. You mentioned fruits and vegetables. A lot of the fruits have, even if they're natural, they have sweet. They're sweet, and they don't help you in terms of glycemic index. How do we know which fruits to eat?
Any of them are better than the sugar that you get in other situations. So
those juices,
yeah. So that the diabetics, if they actually eat fruit, it's good for them, even though it has the right kind of sugar, in contradistinction to the sugars that are found otherwise. So that the fruits that have glucose, they have the right glucose that will help you. And it's one of the interesting things that frightens people, the fact that there is a type of sugar in fruits that is helpful. And they think that because of that they shouldn't eat fruits, but it's not true. It is important for you to eat fruits and vegetables, whether you're a diabetic or not.
All right. Dr. Melanson, you mentioned creatine. What is creatine, and how do we begin to understand and know about the numbers? Because that factors into your GFR.
Absolutely. And as you know, Reverend Curry, it's been relatively controversial recently because, we, for the last, 100 years, have been using a calculation for GFR and and what it's a normative creatinine, and separating out the races. Saying black people should have a certain creatinine and white people should have a certain creatinine. But in general, what creatinine is, it's a chemical that's inside your muscles, and or it's inside protein. So it's in your muscles, and it's also in the food that you eat. So if you eat a lot of meat, particularly red meat, you're getting a lot of creatinine. And then if the more muscular you are, as your muscles break down, there's a lot of creatinine in your blood. And then your kidneys are really good at filtering this stuff out. That's the only way that your body can get rid of creatinine is through the kidney. So if you measure the amount of creatinine in the blood, it will give you a estimate on how well your kidneys are working, right? So even for a big muscular guy, his creatinine should not be above 1.5, right? So a normal creatinine is somewhere around 1 for everybody, right? And there, like I said, depending on your size, it can vary a little bit, but your creatinine is going to give, you put it into a calculation, and that's how you get the glomerular filtration rate, the GFR. And in both instances, you want that to be normal. And normal means that your creatinine, like I said, is going to be around 1, and your GFR is going to be well above 60, around 90. That's normal. With age, it is normal that as we get older, over 50, over 60, over 70, that our creatinine will go up a little bit and our GFR will come down. That's normal. But if there's a steep decrease in the GFR and increase in creatinine, that's a bad sign. And it's that change over time, which is why it's so important to look at your labs every year. You should be looking at the change, because sometimes the doctors are just like anybody else, right? They're in a hurry, and the computer almost needs to clue them in when there's an abnormality. When we get the results, it's in red, right? Your creatinine is all of a sudden it's high. But if you're an astute patient, you should be picking up on the fact that your creatinine is changing year to year or 6 months to 6 months. By looking at what the number was last year and what it is this year. because you can move in the bad direction and still be kind of in the normal range. But that change is actually more important than the actual number. If you were sitting at 0.5, 0.5 last year, and now you're sitting at 0.9, it almost doubled, right? That's a big change for you. The
That's
doctor
right.
see that, right? It's still going to say normal on the lab, but you just had a huge decrease in your GFR. So creatinine level, you should know what it is, and GFR, you should know what that is. Now, if something comes back a little abnormal, again, I get this question all the time. It doesn't mean there's something horrible going on, but it does mean you should follow up on it, and that's the key. So if your number comes back and your creatinine went up, it could be that you were just very highly dehydrated. You get a lot of protein in your diet recently, whatever. But what you should do is hydrate, drink a lot of water, and take it again.
I see.
And if it comes
That's important.
yeah. If
Also,
it comes down,
keep in mind.
normal. Yep.
Also, keep in mind that the protein in your urine will increase long before the creatinine goes up. So
Exactly.
this is the earliest sign of kidney disease, which is why I emphasize if you're over 45, even though your creatinine may be normal, get that urinalysis and have it checked for protein. And if there's protein, even if your creatinine is normal, it's reason for you to do something.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're a little bit off in terms of in this whole piece with regard to living transplantation, but I hope that everyone on here and that will view this program has to not even consider living transplantation because they're healthy.
Right.
But if you do, you know where to go, and that's Dr. Joseph Keith Melanson and Dr. Clive Callender. I will say this: both of you mentioned something that I think is very important regarding creatinine and as well as GFR. And Dr. Melanson, you mentioned dehydration. One of the things that they do before you do your blood test is they tell you to fast, right? And you can only have water or black coffee. But coffee inherently dehydrates you,
Right. Yeah.
which could throw your numbers off. So it doesn't seem wise to drink coffee.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And I see this all the time. And I tell people just drink water. Drink lots of water. And the reason why they have you fast is because, if you just had a sugary meal or whatnot, you can artificially push up your the glucose that's measured or your cholesterol if you just had a fatty meal. So it is good to fast, but you're right. You should drink lots of water, stay well hydrated, and that's going to give you the best numbers. But I want to emphasize what Dr. Callender said because he's 100% correct. The most sensitive test is
urine.
lipstick, and it's the cheapest test. And he's right that sometimes the insurance company they don't want to pay for well, they never want to pay for anything, so they don't want to pay for it in your labs. What you can do, and whatever I tell all my patients, everyone should go to the drugstore and buy a sphygmomanometer, so a blood pressure cuff. You can buy one for $15, and you should be taking your blood pressure multiple times a week. And then you can buy a little thing with the strips, and you can just take a little bit of your urine and dip it. And if the color changes, that tells you that you got a problem. You see, it's seeing protein in your urine. So even without the doctor doing it, you can check your own urine, and you should be checking your blood pressure. And again, let me emphasize, because so many people don't know this, a normal blood pressure is that the top number is less than 120 and the bottom number is less than 80. If it's higher than that, then you have to pay attention to it. I'm not saying you necessarily need to be on medicines unless it's really high. If that top number is above 140 and the bottom number is above 90, you need to be on medicine. You have to stay on it, but you need to be on medicine. And people walking around thinking that I'm 150 over 95 and that's okay for me. No, that's okay if you want a stroke, but that's not okay for you. And
That's right.
Understand.
But look quickly. We're going to have to get ready to go, but it's one person that says they had a dialysis. I guess it's a report, but they don't understand it. And the doctor said that the level is now normal after drinking cranberry juice. Can you speak to a reason why drinking cranberry juice is an aid or not in terms of your condition and your numbers with regard to dialysis? It's hard to understand fully the question, but I did want to try to get that because it seems like somebody that needs help.
Yeah, yeah. Well, classically, the wife's tale, mother's tale is cranberry juice is good for kidney health or your urinary tract health, right?
Infection, yeah,
Because it helps to acidify the urine and it makes your urine more inhospitable to bacteria. So and
right,
that is true. So drinking cranberry juice or drinking or putting lemon in your water, that kind of stuff, that can help with infections. So maybe that's what the patient needs. But typically when you're talking about dialysis, you are trying to avoid things like cranberry juice, orange juice. You're trying to avoid all the juices, and you're trying to, you can drink water, and you're also having to decrease the amount you drink. Period. They
right.
don't be drinking a lot of fluid because you now have to have your fluid managed by the machine. Now there are exceptions to that. If you still make a lot of urine, then you can drink water. And like I said, cranberry juice tends to be a healthier option if you have kidneys that function. But like I said, I'm not sure what this patient is talking about, but it tends to be good for treating infections inside the bladder.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Melanson, Dr. Callender, for another outstanding talk and discussion around, quite frankly, living transplantation and kidney health. So I thank you, Dr. Melanson, and your work at the Ron and Joy Paul Kidney Center, where you're the chief transplant surgeon, and Dr. Clive Callender, who is the leader of MOTEP, which is the Minority Organ Tissue Transplant Education Program. And I'm Kendrick Curry, pastor of the Pennsylvania Avenue Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. Thank you, thank you, thank you for joining us. And another Kidney Talks is been great, and we just thank you so very much. Have a wonderful and blessed day.